I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 2016 Mississippi PowerShell User Group meeting. Tonight we've got David Jones is our guest speaker. He's a 20-year veteran of IT. He's been working with the command line since DOS 2.0, and he's been working with PowerShell off and on since the release of Exchange 2007. And I know we really deep dived into it when DSC was announced, and I met David at a couple of the PowerShell summits, and I was really impressed with his knowledge, which is why I asked him to present for our user group. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, David.
All right, well, thank you, Mike. I tend to do a little better when I have questions, so if you guys have anything, feel free to pipe in. If you have any questions after the fact, you can always hit me up on Twitter at @bit.ly/FlyerLight. So, what we're going to cover. The problem I was initially trying to solve that sent me down this rabbit hole to create the Windows Image Tools module and what it can do and a bit on how it works. So, if you've ever had to build a number of machines, like so for a lab or for work, a lot of people start with a fresh ISO each time if they're trying to make sure it's a clean one, which is very time consuming. Now, I've got a few people at work, they always start with a fresh ISO, even when they're building production systems. And, you know, then it takes an extra day there pretty much to patch up a system before you can even start on the applications. So MDT is something I've worked with in the past, and I know you can use that to automate it, but we don't have it set up at work, and I'm not setting that up at home in the lab. And I'm sure that there's other options out there, but I just wanted something down dirty and simple just to start me off with a clean and fully patched image. And also with the virtualization, small footprint, frequently have to, if I want to put an image out on a Hyper-V server that's out at a branch, you know, it might have a real small pipe, and I've got to be able to transfer that. So I needed to also be able to shrink the image to have just what it needs. And, you know, Nano's not out there quite yet, so what it does is cool, but, you know, I've got to have something that works for now. And if you've ever tried to work with Windows images and with something that's already patched and try to add like .NET 3.5 afterwards, if you don't have an internet connection on a on a running operating system, it has the option to go out to Windows Update and grab the missing features. That doesn't work when you don't have a good internet connection or your proxies blocking system accounts and things like that. Or if you're trying to work with an offline image, that doesn't go out to the internet at all, and you have to have a source that is at the same patch level. Because if it's not at the same patch level, then it won't allow you to add it in. And this became a major frustration for me, especially with DSC. When it first came out, there was this one patch that had to be installed on a Hyper-V host before DSC would kick off. And same for anything on Windows 2012 R2. Once you installed that, you couldn't add any additional features. So using the Windows feature thing to take like a core server and add almost anything, it would always fail. So I have to have a good source WIM in which I can point that to grab stuff. Alright, so what can Windows Image Tools do? Well, one of the things I've seen a lot is when people, they either demo or write a blog about some module that requires a bunch of folder structure, is they might have the script auto-create the folder structure, and then the script's expecting files to already be in the folder it just created, or it just, you have to like watch their demo 3 or 4 times to figure out what files are missing before their thing works. So I decided to create a function that goes with this that is going to automate that portion so that people can see what it is, what environment they need, what is required to make this thing be able to automate regular updates and package them back into an image that is just sysprepped and ready to roll. So I wrote a function that goes with it that is just going to create an example, and it's got all the folders that are needed. It's even going to download one of the resources that it's used for the Windows Update portion. And it's got a number of different examples and a config XML. That's the CLI XML that has just the absolute basics that I had to have in order to run this. Just information that I couldn't glean off of the files I'm working with, because I don't want it to be too complicated to just get started. So I didn't want to have an incredibly hard to set up configuration. All right. Now, anytime you're working with images, the one thing you always got to have, if you want to have any automation, is that unattended XML file. That really complicated bit of XML, and I don't really like working with XML. And most examples out there are always like, well, decide if you're using 32 or 64, and then do a find and replace on all of these different records, and cut and paste here. And it was just more than I wanted to deal with, so I ended up figuring out how to generate XML, and you know, the unattended XML has a namespace stuff that has to be applied everywhere, and if it's not perfect while you're using PowerShell, it breaks the file, and it's not always that easy to find. So I ended up putting everything together into a fairly simple function here. And so in this example here, I've got 3 different users, the built-in administrator and 2 other admins I want to have automatically created. I also want to have a first boot script that's going to happen, so that as soon as Windows starts up that first time and has done all the driver install, it's also going to trigger this PowerShell file. So we gather those parameters and splat it into this. Get this lovely XML file out of it. Now, one of the things I learned while troubleshooting that is you can have both 64 and 32-bit XML entries in the same file, and for the most part, Windows will only read the one that matches the architecture. The only part that's different on that is the commands you're telling it to run. Those run synchronous and run on first boot and those type of entries, they will always run, a 64-bit will always run both the 32 and the 64-bit. So in that case, I've left the 64-bit one empty. And if you see this, one of the things actually here, because I'm adding an administrator account, I've enabled administrator here equals true. That caused it to add this little extra script in here that is just going to do a net use administrator activate. That enables the administrator, because if you don't enable your administrator or you don't add another account, a client OS is going to become unusable because it has no account in which to actually use once it comes up. Some of the other things it's got packaged in here's the different user accounts and their passwords that are hashed in the unattended format. It's not an encryption, so these are actually easily reversible, at least by someone like us. Not the average user that might stumble upon this if you left it out there is not going to have a clue. Some of the other things the unattended can do is like the time zone. Not all of us live in the Pacific, so we always have to change our time zone. So I took the time to code most of those in, because sometimes you don't always remember exactly how it's spelled. And a couple of other features in here was the input locale, system locale. If you've ever had to work with international, I have in a previous job. We had a lot of Spanish builds, so I also filled all those in. You can have the product key. There's a couple of different options for scripts. Like the first login script is going to trigger the first time a administrator logs into the system. And so you can use the auto login. Now I originally set this up using the auto login, but that puts the password in plain text, and it wasn't a necessary step to have a user fully logged in. I discovered that I could do it with the first boot. Just had a few extra steps I had to do to get that to work. All right. Another item that I put in here was this download eval ISO, so that if you wanted to use this to take for a spin, you're going to need a few ISOs in here. So what I've got is this script does a bits download of all the evals that Microsoft's got out there, including I got the TP5 ones also, and it pretty much just repopulates that folder with them. I have that over here. No, I think I cleaned up my drive earlier. But basically, if I were to, if I take one out and we trigger this, it's going to step through each of the different ones and start a bits transfer, which is going to obviously take a little bit to repopulate that one ISO that I just cleared out. Okay. Also here. But one of the other things I had to put together was I needed to work with a VHD. I needed to put files in and out, check whether certain things had changed. So I got this off of someone else's script and kind of, made it mine with some mild changes. It mounts the VHD and then runs a script block, and it has a variable that is populated with the drive letter so that you can you can work with those. And one of the other things here was to create a temporary VM and start it up. But you know how VMs, we got generation 1 and generation 2. I needed to be able to know what type it was, and I wouldn't want to have that always have to be provided, which kind of makes it a little more complicated on my part, but simpler for those who are using it. So the get VHD partition style is going to take a look at what kind of format the thing's in. We're going to use a couple of those functions here. This is something I have to kick off early because it takes a while. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to take this fully patched 2012 R2, and I'm going to make a child VHD off of it so I can keep reusing it. And then I'm going to we're going to use that to show what a system looks like when it's been built with my functions here. So the get VHD partition is going to take a look at that and come back and say, hey, what format are you in? And that's a GPT, so that's a generation 2. So instead of a master boot record, it's using the GUID. So using that information, I'm going to mount this block, and in it I'm going to create an administrator password, copy in an unattended XML, and target it straight inside the machine, and just turn on the stuff. And then, now I wouldn't do this in a production environment, but because I'm trying to use a demo of what is possible, I am copying a source WIM, one that has all the features turned on, into this machine that has like none of the features in it. And then I'm going to use this other function here that is actually going to boot up, create a temporary VM, and we'll cover that a little bit later, but copying these files is going to take a little bit. Okay. So some of the other stuff we had to do, the basics of building the image is getting that VHD out of the ISO file or an existing WIM. So I created a couple functions here. The initialize, the partitions, all that really does is create a VHD and create the appropriate partitions for whether you're doing a generation 1 or generation 2, whether you need appropriate settings, and then the set partition actually populates that from the WIM, and it looks at what type of partition you have and decides, okay, what needs to be in there. Are we doing a recovery drive? Or are we putting in the recovery tools? Or are we just going to lay down the OS? And then the convert WIM to VHD is the one I use the most. It's kind of a wrapper around those two. Now, at some point, I'd like to add the ability to do this same sort of functionality for a physical disk, so that I could boot up off of Windows PE and then just have the script on it automatically just lay down what I need on it. Alrighty. So in that convert function, I've got the location for where we're going to put it. Oops. How big we want it, whether it's a dynamic or not, and I've got these flags here for whether I want a recovery tools or recovery image put in here. Source path. Now, if it can work with ISOs or an existing WIM, so we need the index in case we've got more than one, like on a server OS. Path to the unattended, I want it copied in. Whether it's a native boot, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that's where you don't have any boot code loaded into the ISO. You would do that if you wanted to have a VHD that you booted straight into. Whoops. Have something blow up. What went wrong here? Okay. So this little script, invoke and create VM run and wait, it's going to look at the config information that I'm going to visit here in a little bit, and it's just going to create me a randomly named VM that I'm going to use in this demo once it comes up all the way. Back to this. I can also add.
Hey David, we had a comment from Charles that says, "Is it the boot image number?" I think he's referring to the problem that you were having.
No, the problem was the fact that for some reason the VM generation was not valid. It was coming through as 0, and I'm not quite sure why that would be.
Oh, okay.
So I just reset that variable and ran with it, because it's the only thing I know that's in this that requires either a 1 or a 2. Alright, so I can add, I hate that feature. Alright, so I can add in any additional features if I've got access to the source. Remove features. Now, the main thing I really use that for is like taking out SMB 1.0, because there's like hardly anything that requires it anymore, yet it's still on by default. And these features here are just added, so I'm going to be publishing a newer version up to the PS gallery here. It has this one, but I can now select a feature source, because if you do not supply a source where you want to get the features from, it is going to look at the original source path, and if it's an ISO, it's going to mount every single index on that WIM plus the side-by-side folder and try all of them to add the features in. So I also have the feature source index, so that if you got more than one, that defaults to the first one, which if I've generated something, I only know how to put one into a WIM at a time. And also load the drivers. Now this one here, add payload for removed features, is one that I do use for creating that source image. So it just goes right through the WIM and looks at everything that is in a removed state, and then it's going to try to add those in from wherever I've put the source. And it does software packages that work with DISM. Yeah, it's DISM. And the files to inject basically takes a folder structure and copies it straight to the C drive. I use that to just get my scripts onto it initially. Okay, so in here we've got this config file that holds the following information. So I need to know what kind of IP that this thing's going to need in case I happen to be someplace that doesn't have DHCP, which qualifies for most everything at my work. Whether there needs to be a VLAN on the switch, then just the basic information for the IP address and the switch. So that's the absolute minimum I need in order to get the VM up, connected to the internet, so the scripts can run Windows Update. And since I'm not really fond of XML, this is what it looks like in a CLI XML. I've also put together a basic function to change those settings. So this pretty much just changed which switch it was on and put in some other information. It's not going to be used if DHCP is still set. Let's see how this is coming. Yeah, still booting. Alright, so I have a basic example that comes when you build the file set. That this, while it's quite long, it actually, all it really does is it's going to take the ISOs you've downloaded and pretty much run through the process of creating update images, injecting the files that were required to run and placing them in the appropriate folders. And then at the very bottom, it's going to go every single possible index. So this takes a good 20 hours to run. And I even have a function that adds WMF 4 or 5, so the Windows 7, which there's no eval to download for that, so you'd have to provide that ISO yourself. But it can bring those up to WMF 5 so that they can be used if you're trying to test out DSC on Windows 7, which is something I'm actually working with. Alright, so we did the get configs. Now add an image update. That's a function that is going to take the ISO. So basically here I'm going to tell it the path to where my Windows Image Tools folder structure is, the friendly name I want to use for the image I'm going to create, what type of layout it is. Is it intended for a UEFI or a BIOS based, which is Gen 1, Gen 2 kind of situation. The source to my ISO, I'm going to put in the admin credentials and then grab index number 3 here. Oh. I forgot to clear that file out. That line again. Alright. So, in most of the code I write, I tend to be highly verbose, almost to the point of debugging. But this is going to show, went ahead and it created, initializing the disk as a GPT, created the EFI file system, the Microsoft Reserve partition, a Windows partition, and then it's going to, down here, it's grabbing, it mounted the ISO and is grabbing the install WIM and running index 3 and is laying down the files. or that. Nope, this was ready. So this is a file. Password in. All right. So this is an image I patched up about a week ago. I wanted to show off what is possible. Now I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the network. Alright, so you see most of these hotfixes were all installed back on the 25th. So this is this is pretty much up-to-date machine. And I've removed the install source from just about everything on here in order to get the smallest possible footprint. So almost everything is in here in the removed state. So let's say after the fact, I need to put in server manager in order for someone needs whatever DLLs that go with that are needed for the management utility for a third-party app. So used to Windows 10's functionality. So normally if I were to run this with no network connection, it's going to take a long time and it's going to hang at a few spots as it keeps timing out trying to reach Microsoft and grab the missing files, and then it's just going to time out. But this source WIM, to use that specific format to say, hey, I'm grabbing a WIM and which index to use, that's got absolutely everything in it. So, well, the WIM file itself, let me show you what one of those looks like. No, not that one. See, the base image, and these are fully patched. The one the source that has everything in it is 16 gigs. And the base one is almost 10. Then when they get packaged and come out the other end, the base image is only 5 gigs, and the source one still comes in at a whopping 15. Although the WIMs always tend to be a bit smaller. So 6 gigs for the WIM, which is pretty respectable, and only 2.4 for the WIM file on the fully patched but very limited feature core, which makes it a lot more transportable, especially if you're trying to move things across either a cellular network or which, you know, it's kind of what we're going to somewhat at work, or T1s, which we're trying to get away from. So this is going to run quite a bit. Now, even though I've given it a source, the install Windows feature wants to talk to Windows Update. So it's going to pause at 24% and then again at 68%. And while it tries to run a Windows Update check before and after. So that's going to take a while. Ooh. So kind of what love it when it does that. All right. So add Windows Update. what it's doing, all these things, is it's going to put in going to build an unattended with a set of parameters based on what got pushed to it, but it's primarily going to create a first boot script it wants to run. It needs the admin credential, and it's going to enable the administrator, and if a product key was added, include that too. There's a whole number of other features it passes in. If I want to add or remove features or other such things earlier, I can pass those on. But the main thing that first boot is, now if you're not familiar with the initial boots during when Windows is building itself, it does that initial first boot is the specialized phase, where it's detecting all of the drivers and hardware is in there, and then rebooting once to finalize those, and then after that it comes up and logs it. Well, that's where your a lot of people do their scripts and the automatic login and stuff happens. But I decided to put it on that first boot, and so as it's first coming up, its primary function there is to install drivers. So a lot of the services don't start. So I had to start the scheduling service, and then because I'm supporting Windows 7, I had to use the task schedule, or the schedule task command, to create a scheduled task that's going to run on every time a machine starts up. And all it's doing is looking for this additional file called @startup, and that's kind of where I hook all my functions into for when I want to run Windows updates or install WMF or dysprep. I just keep replacing that file and then booting the thing up. Again, here I'm using that Mountain Run block, and that's just to copy in the script file. And that gets the machine ready for use. It doesn't actually have the script to do the updating itself or do anything beyond it, because that isn't put in until I've decided which function I'm going to use, whether I'm going to invoke a full update or whether I'm going to install WMF. That gets added later. Okay, so that one we just built. So here's the one I just created. It's only about 5.4 gigs because it doesn't have any caches in it. But that's process here in which I've initialized my image basically. So what it went through here is created all of those partitions that I asked for and laid out the operating system, copied in the script files, and also made the thing bootable, and then went ahead and dismounted everything. One of the things with this is every time it mounts a drive and attaches all the drive letters, you end up, Windows 8 and 10 will start popping up windows in front of you. So I disabled that what do you call autoplay feature, as it was just constantly getting in the way. So once you have one put together, the invoke Windows update function, you give it the path to the folder structure, and you can optionally give it just the friendly name of the image you want to update. Now reduce image size goes into the patched image at the end, and it's going to clean things up. It deletes the swap file. I'm not quite sure if that function is needed, and cleans up any extra scripts I put in it. And then it goes through the side-by-side folder and uses the built-in Windows tools to clean out all of the features that I'm not using in that image, and that makes a significant difference in the overall size. of the output, and also say whether I want it to output anything at all, or just a WIM file, or a WIM and a VHD. Now, the reason for the WIM always being part of it is I found that I got the most compact VHDs if I stepped them through a WIM and then relayed out a new image. It only added about 5 minutes to the process on my system. Okay. How this is doing. Yep. Hung at 68. Alright, so the other example I've put in here is shorter, but I refer to it as advanced because it does more of what I use on a regular basis. So I'm basically going to get the credentials for my local administrator I want to use and configure my switch. And then it's going to go through and it's going to create 2 images. One is the source, and that one has add payload for all removed features, and that makes it, you know, a little bit bigger, and index there. So this is that's data center with the GUI. And then my other one is going to be the exact opposite. I've got just core. Put in the admin credentials. Then it goes through and I'm going to update both of them to WMF5. And that's quite an interesting little function itself. Then instead of doing just invoke Windows image update on all of them, I'm going to do one for the core, reducing the image size, and then one again for my source file, where all I want for output is the WIM file itself. And then at the very end, I'm going to schedule a task to run once a month, basically on actually, it's run once a week. I could not figure out how to make a task that would run like on the second or the Wednesday following the second Tuesday, so that it was always, you know, fairly current. But one of the things I had to do is, because I am using the Windows Update package from the gallery here, that the NuGet package provider, every time I got an update, it would hang, because if I tried to update NuGet, it didn't become available in the module, the scope of the scheduled task. So I have to run 2 tasks, one to make sure that NuGet is fully updated, and then the other one to actually go through and get off the Windows Update. Something I wanted to show, and now it's slipping my mind. Oh, the update window WMF. This one was an interesting function to write. I had to be able to go. Yeah, I need that. I need to remove the production preview stuff, but basically I'm going over to Microsoft site, grabbing the latest file and downloading all of them, and then and a copy of .NET 4.6, because you need at least 4.5, and I figured why use, you know, if it's got 4.5, good, but if it doesn't, I'm just going to put 4.6 on it instead.
Yeah, you might as well do 4.6. You're going to need it for PowerShell 5.1.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. They've already got another preview out there. So because these take so long to run, I've got a transaction log from what that advanced one looks like. I know it's a bit wordy, but it's just going to go through and create the images like that one I ran earlier. And one of the things I discovered when writing this is almost everybody who's done any sort of automation for image creation has always used a script. And I was like, why not put it in a module? It's so much easier to port around. Well, it turns out there's a bug that has been in PowerShell since like version 2, that in a module context, when you mount a new drive, it doesn't make the drive letter visible within the context of a function inside your module. So you have to run get ps drive right after mounting something for the drives to become visible to the rest of your function. And I think that's one of those things that everyone else that have actually tried working on this either ran up against, or they just prefer scripts over modules. So that was quite a challenge to figure out. So this is one I ran back in January or February, or actually it's early February. One of the things that does happen when using Windows updates is occasionally Microsoft releases a bad patch, and no matter what you do after that patch has been installed until they release a fixed one, you can't add Windows features from a source at all. And that happened to me in January while I was trying to troubleshoot this for the Omaha PowerShell group, and luckily they meet later in February, and so Microsoft fixed the problem, and I was able to demonstrate the whole thing. Otherwise, I would have been a long time trying to figure out which patch had to be uninstalled before I could actually demonstrate everything. It's still rolling. Let's see. Items I want to point out here. And so it creates two base images with different rules there. Then down here we're running the update, Windows image WMF, and it goes in and checks to see. It goes basically to Microsoft's website, that confirmation page, and downloads every single link off of that just to make sure that I have them. Then it's going to create a VM after it's copied in the .NET source, and then it checks it. If you got which version you got, do I need to change anything, and then we'll install it, and then reboot, check to make sure it installed, and then shut down after it sets a flag file that I can look at from the outside. And then because you can't update WMF with PowerShell, I shut the thing down, and I'm going to, from the outside, use DISM to apply the WMF 5 or 4 if you're working with older Windows, right into it from the outside. And then I have to boot the thing back up after injecting a new on boot script that is going to check which version it is, and then set a flag file saying, hey, yeah, we're good, we're the version we were expecting it to be. And then it shuts it back down, and if those files were seen, then the update file goes, okay, we're good, we're going to package this child image back up to the parent VHD, so that we don't have to make those changes again. And it goes ahead and does that for the other one. Then running the PS Windows Update module, and this is the version that was available at the time this run, 1.5.11, and you know how WMF5 puts everything in a subfolder. So I had, if I happened to be running this against an WMF4 server or something, I needed it to make sure that the side-by-side stuff didn't bite me. So I actually detect whether it's in one of those version numbered folders and move it out when I inject it into the VM before running it. And then we just go through and we use the functions built into that Windows Update. We boot the VM. Here it is. It's creating a VM, totally random name. And this particular process really didn't take very long for the Windows Update, because I think it's already been, changes were detected. So that took about an hour to do the Windows updates on that, and so then it merged another update file back in. and then it ran a sysprep against it. And again, I take another child VHD, and I'm going to run sysprep. And part of the sysprep here for the core version was to remove, decrease the size. So here's where it's removing the page file plus my temporary file, where all my scripts are, and then cleaning all of the old stuff using DISM. So if it's removed, yank it out. Quite a long list. So, and then when it's done, it syspreps the child image, and that way I don't have to do a sysprep against the parent and constantly sysprepping it as far as the history. So once it's in sysprepped, I can get rid of that child VHD and move on. And so the next one pretty much is the same way, but a lot shorter because it's not ripping everything out. This one took this one ran, looks like about an hour or two running the Windows updates, and then doing the sysprep. And at the very end here, this is just the feedback from the scheduled task that was created. Now, on the scheduled task, since it's running once a week, there's usually not patches, so the log for that one is showing that no changes, and it discarded that child VHD. Almost done. Okay. One of the things that I did with the unattend was the really long section with all those parameters. You know how the XML portion, I actually went and did, where is that? I'm actually adding and appending child stuff. And every time you append a child in XML, you have to specify the appropriate schema, or it ends up inserting the default schema into each element. But I didn't really want to spend a lot of time doing find and replace, text things here, text. That's like working in Unix. We're using grep and all those other tools to do prayer-based parsing. So I kept everything as XML and just had to figure out exactly how to use it. But I think the end result was cleaner than trying to go through and do a find and replace to switch which version or architecture or publish bits and pieces in there. And one of the other things I took an approach on, let me see. That one. When I put a script, sorry if I'm scrolling past everything really fast. I've always used so this is like the sysprep at startup. So I'm using, instead of having a text string to insert into a file, I actually used script blocks. So when I insert the script block into a machine, I'm doing a create or new item and passing that script block as a value. I found that makes it a little easier because I've looked at other people's scripts frequently. They're just, here's a big block of text, throw it into a file. Well, while that works, it's also a lot harder to maintain when you're looking at, it's not syntax highlighted or indexed and whatnot. It's a little easier to follow here when I'm using a script block. This demo is the longest thing I've got because, when you're dealing with Windows images, everything takes forever. Does anyone got any questions so far?
If you have a mic, feel free to unmute, or if not, feel free to type your question in the chat.
Oh, I think good so far.
I'm not rambling too much. I'm making sense. I mean, a lot of this isn't just what the function does as an end result. It's kind of the cavats I've ran into along the way. It might help other people with different projects. So, I mean, being able to create and run an image. Okay, this is done. So, this should now have a server manager on it when it comes back up. So besides just creating an image and keeping it up to date, you know, if you're using Windows 10, you've noticed that Microsoft, even though they have their official big updates, they are releasing new ISOs regularly that have, you know, every 2 or 3 months, they've got a new ISO that's already got all the updates applied, which is a great thing, and I'm hoping they carry that forward with 2016. It reduces the amount of patch time involved if you're trying to build up a new system, because as it is, if I've got to build a 2012 because for some reason the software doesn't support R2, I'm still running into that, it's going to take a very long time to get that patched. But
So the code you're showing, or the module, is, I noticed you have a Windows Image Tools repository on GitHub. Is that the best place to find it?
Yes. That's actually WMF demo. I've got a GitHub Windows Image Tools. It's also Find module. That doesn't have the ability. That is not the most current version that's published. I'm working out a few bugs right now, but I've got it so now that you can take that fully patched image and that fully patched source and use the WIMs only to build a brand new VHD straight from those two. And I actually have a demo for that, but there really isn't much to it. You're just watching the verbose log, and then you boot the thing up, and it's, ooh, you know, I started with a file that I have no idea what's in it, and here's Windows with a desktop. Well, that's nice, but you got to know that that initial WIM file didn't have anything, and it's kind of hard to just expect you to take my word for it. So that's why I use this demo where I come up with a core system. I'm going to add in a feature that's in a remove state. But yeah, this Sway slide deck, I've got the link there for that. And I will be I did update this. So this GIST here has all of the files that are not included in the Windows Image Tool.
Also noticed there's a module by that name on the PowerShell gallery. Is that your module as well?
Yep, that's what it is.
Great.
So I'm going to be updating that. The one on the gallery right now is 1.05. So as soon as I finish testing the new feature I added in, and I'm going to update that on the gallery. But it's actually quite easy to publish to the gallery. I was quite surprised. It's just you know, you take it right out of your own machine's module list and just post it there with your ID number. So, I mean, if any of you out there have created a module that you can share it because it's not, you know, proprietary information, you should really take the opportunity to not only try to open source what you can, so that, you know, you can not only help people with your functions, but help them see how you did it, so they can use that knowledge elsewhere. But, you know, get your modules out there into the gallery, because, you know, the more the merrier. We need options and other stuff. What time do you guys usually end? I don't think I ever asked that.
Normally we try to end by 10 anyway, so we've got another 30 minutes. Normally hour and a half, you know, so we're at an hour mark here, but I don't know about the other guys here. I don't think we've lost anybody, so it looks like this is very interesting to me. I mean, I can't wait to actually try this module out.
Well, I tried to make it as easy as possible. That's why I built that function to create the demo structure. Otherwise, you'd all be, oh, I got to read the manual and try all this stuff out. And I'm like, well, I'd rather read code and try it out rather than read someone's instructions.
Yeah, I've done just some very basic stuff compared to what you're doing. I've done some stuff where I've got my user ID and password, and I've got it the very basics with a unattended file, so that way when I spin up a server, I've got a server that's like sysprep that's at least got all the patches to a certain point. So when I boot it up, then I can hit it with DSC and do everything else. But this is much better than my hack job on doing that, you know.
Well, I spent about 6 months working every night on this thing because I just wanted to be able to do this to blog about DSC. I wanted to have something, but I wanted to make sure it was the most current because it's been changing very quickly. And my setup at work, we're still using version 4 on that, and it's not going to work under 5. I've got to retool a whole bunch, so I needed something I could work with. And when I was working on this, it was still all production preview, so it was constantly changing here.
Yeah, I was looking at Charles's comment there. Yeah, what I do, I actually I take my server, and after it's sysprepped, I clone it on our SAN, so I have a SAN volume that has the sysprep server. So then every time I need a new server, I just clone that volume. So I've got a brand new volume on the SAN, and it's a new server, and we're Hyper-V shop, so I just bring up a Hyper-V server that's got a nice cozy connection, and when it comes up, then I can hit it with DSC. But there's a lot of things in this that I still have some manual, like if there's some patches or a new ISO, like David was talking about, then I've got some manual process there, and it looks like I can automate it with this.
Well, I'm hoping people can find it useful and tell me where there's problems with it, see what else I can do. I mean, the next step for me is to make it so I can do physical drives, because I want to be able to take our Hyper-V hosts, and because now that we can run virtual on virtual, I can actually patch up one of those images and then lay that down. Because if you're using the Hyper-V SKU, that miniature one that is licensed differently, Microsoft has never updated the ISO on that. So that really takes a long time to patch. So here we are. We've got Server Manager is now part of the OS, even though it was originally completely moved. And of course, the machine did not have an internet connection, so it couldn't go out to Microsoft and pull it down. So that's the other demo here, which should be about as exciting as watching paint dry. But it is cool on what it does. So this particular one, we're setting our password. I've got an image source where I'm going to put the image, and the feature source, which is that source file with everything in it. And in this case, I'm adding .NET 3.5 and the GUI, but not much else besides that. So it's still, even though it's got the GUI, if you load the GUI straight from the ISO, you're looking at every single feature being on the drive. And there's no need for all those features if you're not using them. I mean, that's the whole concept behind Nano, is if you're not using it, don't have it. So at some point, I want to make this thing work with 2016, and it does work with 2016, but I haven't tested any of these features and functionality with Nano, so I have no idea if the update process will work. But that's one of the things I really want to go forward with, is see if I can utilize what I've already built for Nano. So I found some of these other functions were just kind of internal functions, like they create WIM and wait. And I think I got this off of someone else's I think it was the image factory script gave me the idea, but I was like, this is just too cool to keep it as an internal function. So I had to make it visible to the outside. It also made demos a lot better because, you know, during the whole patching process, or even in a demo when you're working with a VM, you just want it to move on once the thing is closed. You know, or the mount and run block. In this case, you know, the drive letter is the only value that adds to it, but it runs that block against it. So it's also a pretty useful tool if you're just managing VMs or wanting to add other stuff to it before you take them online. Well, that is basically the end of it. Any other questions, comments, things you'd like to see?
If you don't mind, David, the information on that slide there, can you copy and paste? Well, I guess I can download the slide deck and get it. That's how I can get it.
Yeah, you can grab it off the slide deck on my Sway. I'm not much of a PowerPoint person. You know, everybody usually prefers to look at code, but you got to have some sort of presentation. So I decided I'd just use something simple. Sway does the job, and that way I don't have to install anything.
So we did record this session, and we had a question in the chat. We normally post our recording the Tuesday following the meeting, so that'll be next Tuesday. That gives me a chance to go through and just trim the beginning and end, and put a post out there and upload it to YouTube, and then we just embed it into a post. So you can go to our user group website and watch it there, or you can go to YouTube and watch it. And what I'll do on that also in the post is I'll put the information that David's got on this slide on that post. Well, I'll put a link to the slide deck, and then you can get everything else from there.
However you want to do that. I'm also, the version I was using in this demo has got a few new features versus what's actually out there on the gallery. The GitHub one and the development branch happens to have everything that I was working with today. So I'm going to get that polished up and pushed out to the gallery hopefully by the end of the week, so that one has the ability to include a specific source when you want to push out a new VHD, so that you know, it makes it a little easier. You just only have to keep the two WIM outputs, and then build whatever you need with whatever features you want off of that. It is a good idea, though, when you run this, take a backup each month after they've been updated, in case Microsoft hits you with one of those patches that it breaks things. They usually get it fixed, because people like me end up calling their tech support and they pass it up, and then it gets fixed the next month. But it's a real bear to figure out which patch that month broke everything.
Okay, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to present this for us, David. And this is something that it's very interesting, but also it's something that I think anybody can use, anybody who's building servers or desktops, because
oh yeah, this does work fine with desktops too. So if you like building images and you want to start with a scratch, you know, and keep a current one that you know what's going on, because you know how images tend to mutate over time with unexpected changes that'll come back and bite you in the butt after you've pushed it out to 30 machines.
Okay, do we have any final questions for David? Okay, well, thank you again, David, and have a great night. And you said you spent like 6 months of nights working on this, and I can definitely, like I said, I've worked with this just a little bit, and enough to know that I can tell that you spent an enormous amount of time polishing this.
Yeah, it looks really, really good. I agree.
Well, I hope it's useful for more than just me. That I hate to have my effort go to waste if it's just me using it a couple of times a year. So I'll be using it more and more.
I think a lot of people are going to find use out of it. I'm going to give it a shot myself, actually.
All right. Well, if you run into problems, there's my Twitter handle. Go ahead and let me know, and we'll work together to see if I can get it fixed and make it more useful for people.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you guys for having me.